wasn't expecting it. That's what keeps replaying in my head over and over again, like a broken record I can't stop. My boss Harrison called me into the conference room on a Tuesday morning at exactly 9:30 a.m., and I thought maybe it was about the Henderson account or the quarterly projections I'd been working on for the past 6 weeks. I walked in with my coffee still steaming, carrying my leather notebook, ready to talk business like any normal day at the office. Instead, Harrison slid a white envelope across the polished mahogany table with a thin smile that made my stomach drop instantly and painfully. Inside was a termination letter, printed on official company letterhead with the company seal. The words blurred together as I read them frantically, but one number jumped out at me like a knife through my chest. $3.7 million missing from client accounts. My mind screamed betrayal. My hands trembled violently as I read the accusation carefully. The letter said I had been moving money without authorization, that I was embezzling from the company, stealing from our clients. Me. The person who followed every rule obsessively, who double-checked every transfer multiple times, who documented everything meticulously in detailed reports. Did he just frame me? I looked at Harrison's face, searching desperately for any sign that this was a mistake, but his expression was cold and certain. He leaned back in his leather chair, completely composed, his fingers steepled together. I felt my world crashing down around me in that single moment. I sat in my car in the parking lot for what felt like hours, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white and ached painfully. Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall in public where anyone could see me. I kept thinking about all the late nights I'd worked without complaint, all the times I'd come in at dawn to help the company succeed and grow. Through the windshield, I watched my colleagues walking past the car windows, their eyes averted, avoiding eye contact like I'd already been marked as guilty of something terrible. Then something caught my attention on my phone, a notification chiming loudly. An email from a client named Holloway Industries had arrived. The message mentioned irregular payments, and asked urgent questions about recent transfers and account activities that didn't match their records. My pulse quickened immediately and my heart started racing. I opened the file attachment with trembling fingers and saw a list of invoices that didn't match what I'd processed in our system. The numbers were completely different, inconsistent with what I'd recorded. Could this be proof? Could this show that someone else was making unauthorized transfers, not me? My hands shook as I saved the email to my personal drive, knowing I needed to keep this safe forever. Something wasn't adding up, and I needed to understand what was really happening before it destroyed me completely. I had to go back 6 months to make sense of everything that was unfolding. It started when I noticed small errors in the expense reports. Numbers that seemed off, transfers that weren't explained properly in the documentation. I'd flagged them to Harrison, assuming it was just a clerical mistake that needed fixing immediately. He'd laughed it off like I was being paranoid and ridiculous. "Don't worry about it," he'd said, waving his hand dismissively at my concerns. "You're too careful, always looking for problems that don't exist." At the time I thought he was right that maybe I was overthinking things and being too cautious. But looking back now, I could see the pattern crystal clear as day. The arrogance in his voice when he dismissed my concerns. The way he'd changed the subject quickly to something else. The dangerous confidence that made him believe he could get away with anything he wanted. Was this a warning I should have seen earlier and paid attention to? I'd been naive, trusting that my boss was honest and trustworthy, that everyone followed the rules and acted with integrity. That trust had become my biggest weakness and vulnerability. I realized then that I should have pushed harder, asked more questions, demanded answers instead of backing down so easily. That night, unable to sleep and consumed by anxiety that kept me awake, I drove back to the office. The parking lot was empty except for the security lights casting long shadows across the pavement. I used my keycard to get inside, my heart pounding with each step toward Harrison's office. He always locked his computer carefully, but I knew his password from our years working together closely. We'd shared access for legitimate business reasons, and he'd never bothered to change it after our work partnership became routine. Once I was in his system, I navigated to a hidden folder labeled Archive that most people didn't know about. Inside were invoices and receipts that didn't match our official records at all. My pulse raced as I read through them carefully and methodically. The numbers told a story of deception and careful planning. And there, repeated on nearly every single document, was one name: Pinnacle Holdings LLC. A shell company. My chest tightened as I realized what I was looking at. This wasn't just fraud or accounting errors. This was Harrison stealing from the company, from our clients systematically, and he was trying to pin it on me to save himself. My phone rang the next morning at 9 o'clock sharp. It was Harrison calling, his voice smooth and almost friendly, which made it even worse somehow. "Hey, I've been thinking," he said carefully. "Maybe you didn't understand your role completely. Maybe the stress got to you recently." His words dripped with fake concern, but I could hear the threat underneath every syllable. He was testing me, seeing if I'd stay quiet about what I knew or if I'd start asking difficult questions that might expose him. I hung up without responding, leaving him in silence. That phone call changed everything in that moment. I now knew for certain that Harrison was aware I was suspicious about him. He knew I'd been digging into files and records, and he was trying to intimidate me into silence. My hands trembled as I held the phone, but something inside me crystallized into determination like steel. I wasn't going to let him destroy my reputation and my entire career. I wasn't going to disappear quietly into the background. I was going to fight back, even if I had to do it alone against him and whatever power he wielded. For the next 3 weeks, I became invisible around the office like a ghost. I started tracking every single email, every transfer record, every slip-up Harrison made in his carelessness. I'd arrive early at dawn before anyone else, work late into the evening, and copy files onto encrypted USB drives hidden carefully in my apartment in a secure location. Each day brought new evidence that shocked me and confirmed my worst fears. I found duplicate invoices sent multiple times, falsified approvals from people who never authorized them, and unauthorized wire transfers to unknown accounts. Then I found it. A missing $120,000 that had appeared in an account I didn't recognize at first glance. When I traced it back through the system meticulously and carefully, it led directly to a personal bank account registered to Harrison himself. That one transfer was the proof I needed to confirm everything definitively. It showed clear intent to steal, clear theft, clear guilt beyond any doubt whatsoever. I saved everything to multiple secure locations, backing up my backup repeatedly and carefully. If he tried to cover his tracks by deleting evidence, I'd still have copies preserved safely. I also took screenshots and printed documents, keeping them in a waterproof safe at my home. I needed someone I could trust with this dangerous information. An old coworker named Miguel had always been honest with me over the years, and we'd stayed friends even after he moved to a different department. I met him for coffee at a quiet place away from the office where no one would see us together. I carefully explained what I'd found, without giving away too many details about my methods and how I obtained the information. His face went pale as he listened to my story carefully. "He'll ruin you if he knows you're on to him," Miguel warned me seriously and emphatically. I nodded, understanding the real risk I was taking by confiding in someone. But I needed to know if I was right, if my suspicions made logical sense to someone else I trusted. Miguel confirmed everything I suspected was true. "Yeah," he said quietly over his cup of coffee. "I've always thought Harrison was sketchy and dishonest about things. But I never had proof to back it up." I thanked him and stressed that he couldn't tell anyone about our conversation. This had to stay between us completely and remain confidential. Miguel agreed reluctantly, but I could see the worry in his eyes about what might happen to me. The tension in team meetings became absolutely unbearable over the following weeks and months. Harrison would make subtle jabs at my competence in front of important clients and colleagues to humiliate me. "Well, you know how some people can get confused with complex accounting and numbers," he'd say with a calculated laugh, and everyone would turn to look at me uncomfortably. My face would flush with anger and embarrassment, but I'd bite back my response and my retorts, pretending to be ignorant of his attacks. I'd learned that staying quiet was my best weapon against him. The less I reacted, the more he underestimated my intelligence and capability. But my hands would tremble under the table where no one could see them, and I could feel sweat forming on my temples. I was living a double life now completely. At work, I was the disgraced employee everyone was avoiding and judging harshly. At home, I was a detective building an airtight case against my boss. Did someone notice my trembling hands or my nervous behavior? Did anyone suspect I was planning something significant? I couldn't afford for anyone to figure out what I was really doing and planning. Then came the major breakthrough that changed everything forever. I was reviewing old expense reports late one night when I spotted a pattern in the reimbursements that seemed deliberate and calculated. Fraudulent charges for hotels, flights, and meals that never actually happened in reality. Each file was a key to the puzzle. If I traced them all back to their sources, I could connect Harrison directly to the entire $3.7 million theft. My heart raced as I mapped out the connections on a detailed spreadsheet on my laptop. Invoice dates matched transfer dates perfectly and consistently. Recipient accounts led directly to Harrison's shell company operations. Everything connected like a perfect chain of evidence. If I trace them all, I can connect him to the $3.7 million definitively and completely. That realization made me feel both terrified and powerful at the same time. I had what I needed to expose him and bring him to justice. But I also had to be careful about my next moves. One wrong move, one suspicious access, and he could destroy the evidence or destroy me professionally and personally. I decided I needed to be even more careful and strategic. Harrison tightened his control over the office dramatically and noticeably. I noticed he'd installed new keycard security logs, tracking everyone's movements and computer access carefully. Suddenly, I realized my days of accessing his files were numbered and limited. My stomach twisted with urgency and fear. Can I extract the remaining files before he blocks me completely and forever? I accelerated my plan significantly and immediately, spending every available moment pulling documents, copying records, and downloading everything I needed carefully. I worked late into the evenings when the office was completely empty and silent, my fingers flying across the keyboard rapidly. I was racing against time, knowing that at any moment Harrison could revoke my access or lock me out completely from his systems. The pressure was immense, but it also kept me focused and driven. I had maybe a week before the security system was fully integrated. A week to gather everything crucial and important before it was too late. I worked through the nights, my coffee growing cold as I focused on the task. My apartment became a war room with documents spread everywhere. I had files organized by date, by account, by transaction type. I created index cards for cross-referencing. I burned copies to CDs and hid them in different locations. I memorized passwords and account numbers. Every night, I felt the weight of what I was doing getting heavier, but I couldn't stop. Not when I was this close to having everything I needed. Late one night, working from my home office with cold coffee beside me, I spread all the documents across my desk and began my own forensic accounting carefully. I cross-checked every account number, every date, every amount meticulously and thoroughly. Sweat dripped down my temple as I worked intensely, the numbers blurring together from exhaustion and stress. Each line sharpened my plan and my resolve to see this through to the end. Then I found them. Offshore transfers to multiple countries and islands. Harrison had been routing money through banks in the Cayman Islands and Singapore systematically and deliberately. The complexity of it was almost impressive, if it wasn't so criminal and wrong. Did I just uncover offshore transfers? Yes, I had discovered them finally. And now I held proof of international fraud and money laundering. My hands shook as I realized the magnitude of what I'd discovered. This wasn't just company theft or embezzlement. This was organized, premeditated financial crime on a global scale that could hurt many people. I found transfer receipts showing money flowing to shell companies in 3 different countries. The dates matched perfectly with depleted client accounts. I traced one account to a luxury property purchase in Monaco. Another led to a yacht registration. Harrison was living a double life, spending stolen money on things only the wealthy could afford. I realized he had been planning this for years, methodically building his exit strategy. He'd been preparing to disappear all along. But there was a cost to all this investigation I was conducting secretly. Harrison began undermining my credibility with HR deliberately and maliciously, spreading rumors that I had a drinking problem, that I was mentally unstable, that I'd been making mistakes for months. My friends worried about my reputation and what people were saying about me. Colleagues I'd worked with for years suddenly stopped returning my calls or emails completely. The isolation was crushing and painful beyond belief. Some days I'd sit at my desk, supposedly working on small projects Harrison gave me, while my entire professional identity was being destroyed systematically by lies. How far will he go to protect himself and his crimes? The answer terrified me deeply and kept me awake at night. He seemed willing to destroy anyone who threatened him and his criminal operation. But I couldn't let his lies stop me or my investigation. Every rumor he spread, every person he turned against me, only confirmed what I already knew. He was guilty, and he was panicking about discovery. I started documenting everything he said and did, creating a timeline of his attacks. Each rumor was another piece of evidence that he was desperate. I realized that his smear campaign was actually his biggest mistake because it showed consciousness of guilt. An innocent person doesn't need to destroy your reputation. Only a guilty person panics. One afternoon, I received an email that seemed like a gift from the universe itself and divine providence. A client named Holloway Industries had accidentally sent Harrison a suspicious document that went to my email instead through a routing error. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it carefully with shaking hands. Inside was a list of payments that didn't match our official invoices anywhere in our system. This was the smoking gun I'd been searching for desperately. This document proved that Harrison was charging clients for services that were never provided and pocketing the difference illegally. I immediately saved it to my secure backup in multiple locations and devices. Will he notice the leak? That was my biggest fear constantly. If Harrison realized that a client document had been misdirected to me, he might contact them and discover the truth himself. He might destroy evidence or flee before I could go to the authorities. Time was running out faster than I'd anticipated or planned for. I studied the document for hours. The discrepancies were massive. Holloway Industries claimed they were billed for consulting services that never happened. The amounts were staggering. This wasn't small-time theft. This was systematic fraud against major clients. I realized that Holloway wasn't the only victim. If I traced this pattern, there were probably dozens of clients being scammed the same way. I decided to test his reactions deliberately and carefully to see how he would respond. In a meeting with Harrison and a few colleagues present, I casually mentioned a small discrepancy I'd found in an expense report. Just a minor thing, I said, watching his face carefully for any reaction or sign of guilt. His micro-expression told me everything I needed to know immediately. For just a fraction of a second, his eyes widened and his jaw tightened visibly. Then he recovered quickly, waving it off with a forced laugh that sounded unnatural. "You're always finding problems that don't exist," he said to the room dismissively and coldly. But I'd seen the fear flash across his face. He was smug most of the time, overconfident that he was smarter than everyone else around him. But that split-second reaction revealed the truth underneath all the lies. Could arrogance be his downfall? I believed it would be. His certainty that he'd never get caught, that he was too clever, that nobody would ever suspect him. That confidence was going to destroy him. I realized in that moment that my strategy was working. He was getting nervous. He was making mistakes. His control was slipping. That night, I discovered his biggest mistake and his fatal flaw that would be his undoing. I found emails between Harrison and someone named Trevor at an offshore banking firm in the Cayman Islands. They were discussing a final transfer of $2 million scheduled for the following evening at 6 o'clock sharp. Harrison was planning to move the remaining money out of the country, finalizing his escape plan completely and permanently. My chest tightened with urgent realization and dread. I had maybe 24 hours before the money disappeared forever into offshore accounts. If that transfer went through, recovering it might become impossible or extremely difficult. Can I stop the transfer without tipping him off and alerting him? The answer was no, I realized immediately. I couldn't stop it alone. I couldn't block the transfer or freeze the account myself. I could only do one thing: move up my timeline significantly and contact the authorities immediately. That night I made the decision that would change everything forever. I sat at my kitchen table, my hands shaking, staring at the emails. This was it. This was the moment. I had to act now or lose everything. I spent hours creating perfect digital copies of every file, every email, every piece of evidence I'd collected meticulously. I used encryption software to hide everything securely, creating backups in cloud storage accounts under false names carefully. My heart pounded with fear and exhilaration as I worked through the night without sleep. What if he audits tomorrow and finds my activities? What if he discovers what I've done before I can go to the authorities? The fear was real and intense, but so was my determination and resolve. By dawn, I had everything organized and accessible from multiple locations and devices. I'd created a forensic report that was so detailed and comprehensive that no one could dispute it ever or challenge it. Every transaction traced with precision and accuracy. Every shell company identified completely. Every offshore account documented thoroughly with dates and amounts. I'd done the work of a professional accountant and investigator combined, all from my apartment, all from my anger and my need for justice. I created an executive summary for the FBI that was just 5 pages but contained the essence of everything. That summary would be the key that unlocked the entire case. The next morning, I reached out to an IT contractor named James who sometimes did work for our company. I knew he was brilliant with systems and security protocols. During a casual conversation in the break room over coffee, I subtly mentioned that I'd noticed some strange computer activity in Harrison's office recently. I didn't explicitly ask for help directly, but I left clear breadcrumbs for him to follow. James was intelligent enough to understand what I was implying without saying it directly. A few days later, he told me that he'd discovered anomalies in the server logs, unusual file access patterns, deleted emails that had been recovered by forensic tools, and suspicious login attempts at odd hours. Without me asking directly, he'd started investigating on his own. Can he be trusted? Thought so carefully. James seemed to be motivated by justice, not money or politics or personal gain. When I finally told him the full story, he became an ally I didn't expect to have. He helped me understand the technical details of Harrison's cover-up attempts. Harrison grew suspicious of me deliberately and started acting differently toward me. He started calling HR with vague complaints about my behavior, suggesting that I was unstable and unreliable. My hands trembled when I heard from HR that they wanted to meet with me about serious concerns they'd received. My pulse raced as I sat across from the human resources manager, who informed me that I was being put on administrative leave pending an investigation into Harrison's accusations. Will they take action against me first? That was my greatest fear constantly, and it haunted me. If I was suspended or fired before I could contact the authorities, everything would be ruined completely. But I'd prepared for this possibility carefully and strategically. I calmly told the HR manager that I had serious concerns about Harrison's conduct, and I asked if I could share documentation. I didn't give her everything, just enough to make her pause and reconsider his accusations. She agreed to listen, and I handed her a sealed envelope with a summary of my findings. The HR manager's expression changed as she read it. I could see the moment realization dawned on her face that she was dealing with something much bigger than a simple personnel issue. My parents called that evening, asking why I sounded so stressed and worried about something. I lied, smiling thinly over the phone, assuring them that work was just busy and demanding as usual. I couldn't tell them the truth about what was happening and what I was involved in. They would have tried to protect me by telling me to forget about it, to move on, to let someone else handle it. But I couldn't move on or ignore this. I couldn't let this go or pretend it didn't happen. The weight of what I was carrying was enormous and exhausting beyond belief. Can I maintain the facade much longer? Had to try. I couldn't let anyone know how close I was to breaking, how exhausted I felt, how much this was consuming my entire life. Every day felt like walking a tightrope between exposure and justice. One wrong step and everything would collapse. My parents kept asking if something was wrong, but I assured them everything was fine. I told them I was just working hard on a big project. The lie felt heavier each time I repeated it. I made the final decision that evening after careful consideration and weighing of options. I contacted the FBI through a secure online portal, attaching a redacted version of my forensic report carefully and strategically. I didn't include my name, just enough information to show that this was real and legitimate, that the allegations were serious and well documented. The ball started rolling in federal offices somewhere unknown to me. I couldn't see it yet, but I could feel it happening somewhere in the system. Somewhere in a federal office, investigators were reading my report, making phone calls, preparing their own case. Will he notice the trail leading back to me? That question kept me awake at night constantly and made me anxious. But I'd been careful and strategic about everything. I'd routed my communication through secure servers and anonymous accounts carefully. Harrison shouldn't be able to trace anything back to me. Not yet anyway, or in the foreseeable future. I waited by my phone, nervous and excited, hoping the FBI would take action quickly. Then he launched a full smear campaign against me publicly and at work. Emails started circulating throughout the company questioning my competence and my mental health deliberately. He told people I'd been making unauthorized changes to files, that I was unreliable and unstable, that I was probably looking for revenge because I'd been fired. My name was dragged through mud and destroyed in people's eyes. Colleagues who'd once respected me now looked at me with suspicion and doubt. The isolation became complete and total. Can I survive his social manipulation and lies? I had to try and push through. I refused to fight back publicly or defend myself against his accusations. Instead, I documented every email, every rumor, every lie he spread systematically. Let him hang himself with his own words. Let him create a record of his panic and his desperation. Every accusation he made against me was actually proof that he was guilty, that he was running scared and making mistakes. I saved everything in a separate folder labeled with timestamps. Each email was another piece of evidence that the FBI would find valuable. His desperation was inadvertently helping my case against him. 2 weeks after I contacted the FBI, I found the ultimate confirmation of my fears and my hopes combined perfectly. Harrison had booked a one-way ticket to Paraguay for the following evening, leaving no return date on the ticket. He was planning to flee the country and disappear forever. My jaw tightened as I realized the timeline was critical and urgent. Can I act before he disappears forever? I couldn't wait any longer or hesitate. I contacted the FBI again through the same secure channel and informed them that Harrison was planning to flee to South America. This was my final push and my last chance. This was the moment when everything would come down to the wire and be decided. I sent the flight details, his passport information, and everything else I could find. I knew this was the last piece of information they needed to move forward with arrests. Within hours, I received a response. The investigation was progressing faster than expected. They had enough evidence. Action was imminent. The next morning I walked into work like nothing was different, like I didn't know that my world was about to change forever and completely. Around noon, federal agents entered the building suddenly and without warning. They went straight to Harrison's office without hesitation or delay. I watched from a distance as they handed him papers and placed him under arrest. The company went into shock and chaos. My heart raced as I saw him being escorted out in handcuffs, his face pale and confused, finally realizing that his arrogance had caught up with him. Will justice finally catch him? Yes, it would. The evidence was undeniable and overwhelming. The charges were serious and well documented. He'd stolen millions, and now he'd have to answer for it. As I watched him leave, I felt a sense of validation wash over me. All the sleepless nights, all the fear, all the isolation, it had been worth it. Justice was finally happening. His empire crumbled in days as news spread throughout the industry. Colleagues whispered about the investigation constantly and everywhere. The company hired external auditors to review all accounts thoroughly and carefully. News of his arrest leaked to the media, and suddenly everyone wanted to talk about the embezzlement scheme and fraud. The company he'd built, the reputation he'd cultivated, all of it dissolved under the weight of his greed and arrogance. I watched it all happen from the sidelines, knowing that I'd been the catalyst. I'd been the one brave enough to refuse silence and speak up. I'd been the one willing to fight for the truth. Can I finally breathe? I was beginning to feel like I could. The company called me back to work with a formal apology. They offered me a promotion and a significant raise. But more than that, they offered me respect and acknowledgement of what I'd done. The CEO personally thanked me for my courage and integrity. I realized that sometimes doing the right thing does pay off. 6 months later, I returned to work with my head held high and with pride. The company had implemented new controls and transparency measures across all departments. My reputation had been restored completely. The false accusations retracted and apologized for sincerely. My colleagues treated me with respect now, understanding that I'd been right all along. My bank account was intact, my dignity restored, my career salvaged and stronger than before. I smiled, reflecting on everything that had happened and what I'd learned. I'd learned that patience, precision, and integrity are the ultimate weapons. More than that, I'd learned that betrayal doesn't define you. Your choices define you. I chose truth over comfort. I chose justice over revenge. I chose action over silence. I chose to be brave when it was easier to be silent. And in the end, that made all the difference in everything. Harrison was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The stolen money was being recovered. The company's clients received restitution. And I had proved that one person with courage and determination can change everything. My journey taught me that doing the right thing is always worth the cost.